The King of Fighters 13.
Alright.
I've heard that this is your favorite fighting game. Is that true?
It's not just my favorite fighting game, it's one of my favorite games. It's usually if I'm playing it, it's my #1 favorite game of all time. If I'm not playing it, it might be #2.
Alright, well why do you say that?
Well, it came at a time when all of my favorite fighting game franchises were moving from 2D sprites to pseudo 3D. Everything was becoming 2.5, which wouldn't be a bad thing if it wasn't for the fact that, like, say for example Street Fighter 4, and I know I want to make the FGC really mad here, but holy moly. Street Fighter 4 is one of the ugliest looking games I've ever seen. Street Fighter 5 is like the only game that I can think of that's uglier. I've heard it said that SNK Playmore went bankrupt making this game, and I can believe it because it's absolutely gorgeous. Graphically, sound-wise, gameplay-wise, it's gorgeous. The actual combat is sprite-based, but all the special effects in the game seem modern. Like they come from almost like the Unreal Engine or something like that. And it just looks so beautiful. Now, graphics aren't everything, and obviously King of Fighters 13 would not be my #1 favorite game while I'm playing it if it was just because of the graphics. It has to be backed up by the fun factor, and I think the combat is just fantastic. I love the inclusion of drive cancel. It's one of my favorite features of King of Fighters 13. 95% of the moves, special moves in that game, are cancelable if you have a drive gauge. What that allows is a remarkable variety of play styles, which makes it so much fun to watch it being played by professionals online or people who are really good at it. The only other games I can think of that have that much variety in how they play would be like the big ones, like Guilty Gear XIII with the Roman cancel that allows different mix-ups, and then of course Tekken, which is one of the most complicated fighting games ever made. I've always been an SNK fan, and King of Fighters has always been my favorite fighting game series. First King of Fighters game I ever played was '94, and immediately thought that Terry Bogard and Kyo Kusanagi were so cool. I never really felt that way with any of the Street Fighter characters. Like, they didn't strike me as being as cool. Like, I thought Street Fighter was fun, and I liked fighting games. I never thought the Street Fighter characters were as memorable or as interesting as KOF characters. And I think a lot of that has to do with just character design. A lot of people disagree on this. A lot of people complain about KOF's character models and character designs. Now, this is going to make people gag. But I would totally take a character like Ash Crimson way over a boring character like Ryu from Street Fighter. Just so much more interesting. I saw a YouTube video about the difference between SNK characters and Capcom characters. I wish I remember who had made it. They made a statement that I thought was really interesting. And they said one of the biggest differences when it comes to characters design between SNK characters and Capcom characters is that you'll notice that SNK, when it comes to their art direction, will emphasize characters' clothing, where Capcom tends to focus on characters' muscles and body features. If you watch and pay close attention, there's a lot more attention to detail on SNK when it comes to fabric. Iori's coat and his pants and stuff like that. Versus, like, if you look at Ryo or even Ken, all the emphasis is placed on hands and feet and muscles, arms and legs, where all the animation for SNK characters is usually placed upon fabric or hair. KOF is my favorite fighting game series. I think King of Fighters 13 is the pinnacle of it. It's where you had gameplay and graphics combined in a way that was just flawless. I think King of Fighters 13 is the Symphony of the Night, Castlevania Symphony of the Night for fighting games. The fighting game world was switching from 2D over to 3D ever since Street Fighter 4 and even before that with Mortal Kombat back in 2009. And yet SNK still poured their money into making a sprite-based fighting game. You know, like, I think the only company that's even coming close to that is probably Arc Systems.
How is the character roster in King of Fighters 13?
If you watch some of these King of Fighters 13 tournaments that were going on the sides, it's still absolutely amazing the variety of characters that are chosen from there. And that's without, you know, season passes. You will definitely see a lot of EX Iori or Flame Iori, you know, because he is S tier, S plus tier. But then that makes it more exciting when you see someone with a low tier character like Leona defeat a Flame Iori, because there's nothing wrong with tiers. If everything was balanced, that takes some of the fun out of it. You know, one of the most unbalanced games ever is Third Strike. Tiers are fun. Everything's balanced, it sucks. And I think that's why Tekken is really, really crumbling. Tekken 7, for the longest time, Tekken 7 was my favorite fighting game. I liked it more than King of Fighters 13. I am so grateful that King of Fighters 13 was not a service-based game, because over time, Tekken 7 has kind of crumbled and turned into this mishmash of just blah. Where King of Fighters 13 has remained unchanged, and yet it's still so much fun, despite the imbalance of the characters in it.
Are there any flaws that come to mind about this game?
The story mode is really boring. The final boss, which this is just every SNK fighting game, the final boss is super cheap. Every time I play single player mode in that game, it always boils down to just luck. You can be really, really, really good at King of Fighters 13, but I had it before where I was juggling the boss like in the middle of a combo, and he teleported out of my combo. And that's just SNK. That's just like one thing you just have to accept. And if you're playing an SNK game, you're gonna have cheap bosses.
I like the music.
It's my favorite. I like it way more than King of Fighters 14. People complain about the music in it, and I completely cannot relate to those people. I think King of Fighters 13 has the best soundtrack of any of the King of Fighters games. It's SNK at their best.
What would you rate King of Fighters 13?
I would rate it a 9.8, and that's just because the story sucks. But when is the last time you played a true fighting game that had a good story? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
People don't play fighting games for the story unless if you're one of those people who like, oh, I love Injustice and I love Mortal Kombat 11. Well then yeah, you probably play games for the story. But if you're really into competitive fighting games, especially Japanese fighting games, you just have come to terms that you're never going to play a Japanese fighting game for a good story. It's just one of those things you accept. You know? Like, how did we go from Third Strike to Street Fighter 4? We went from one of the most beautiful looking fighting games of all time to one of the most ugly looking fighting games of all time. And then people are okay with it. The FGC is okay with it. They think, like, I don't get it.